The standing order at Triage Station Curl was simple: treat humans first. It was not written down anywhere. It was not in the coalition protocols, which ran to 400 pages and said nothing useful about bleeding. It was simply understood, the way most things at Curl were understood, by the 4 human medics assigned to a forward operating zone that technically housed 7 species and actually housed 11, depending on the week in which transport had come in overnight. Corporal Eli Vance had been at Curl for 8 months. He had treated humans first for 8 months because that was the order and because the standing order had logic behind it. Cross-species transfusion protocols were complicated, incomplete in their database records, and in 2 documented cases had accelerated fatalities. It was safer to wait for species-matched blood. It was correct protocol. It was the thing a careful medic did. He knew all of this. He believed most of it. He had just never had to apply it to someone who was actively dying in front of him. Her name, he learned later, was Rael Voss. He did not know her name when they brought her in. He did not know her rank stripped. He would learn, 6 months prior to the engagement that put her in his triage bay. He did not know her species name for themselves, which was Ethoriketh, or that they had a blood debt loss so old its exact origin had been lost to 3 separate planetary catastrophes, or that in the 400 pages of coalition protocols the word Kethsal did not appear once. He knew she was bleeding from 3 places, that 2 of them were manageable, and that the third, a deep fragmentation wound to the side, the shrapnel still in, was not. He knew her blood pressure had dropped to a number his monitor was flagging red. He knew that the species-matched reserve for Ethoriketh at Curl was empty, had been empty for 11 days, since the last resupply transport came in short. He knew his own blood had been typed for cross-species compatibility in his first month at Curl, as all medics were, a precaution, a baseline, never expected to be relevant. He knew the type match result for Ethoriketh was in his file. He knew it was partial. He knew partial was not the same as safe. He also knew that she was going to die in approximately 4 minutes if he waited for anything better. Corporal Vance set down the monitor, opened his own kit, and did the thing that was not in any standing order. He pushed through the shrapnel extraction and the stabilization before he let himself feel the toll of it. That was how it worked, adrenaline as a curtain. The curtain came down after. He was sitting on the floor of his own triage bay when Lieutenant Mark found him, which was not the most professional position he had ever been found in, but was at least explained by the fact that he had given slightly more of his blood than he had intended, because the monitor for the Ethoriketh had taken longer to turn green than he'd accounted for. "Vance," said Mark. "She's stable," Eli said. "Shrapnel's out, pressure's holding." A pause. "You used your own blood." "It was a partial match. Stabilized her long enough to finish the extraction. It was a calculated." "Vance, I'm aware of what you did. I'm trying to decide how to file it." He looked up at her. Mark was a fair person, which in his experience meant she did not decide things quickly. "File it accurately," he said. "I made a judgment call. I stand by it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the bay where Rael Voss was breathing steadily, hooked to 3 monitors, her gold dark skin, the color of old bronze in the bay lighting, no longer the wrong, ashen gray it had been 40 minutes ago. "Get some fluids," Mark said. "I'll figure out the paperwork." She did not say he had done wrong. She also did not say he had done right. That was, Eli thought, about as much as he could ask for. She was conscious on the 3rd day. He knew because he checked the monitoring log, as he did each morning, and the unconscious patient notation had changed to alert and stable. He knew because when he came on shift, Medic Second Orion told him, "Your Kethsal patient is awake and has been asking for the human who brought her back." "She hasn't been told my name," Eli said. "She hasn't needed it. She says she knows the hands." He stood with that for a moment. Rael Voss was sitting up when he entered. That was the first surprise. He'd been prepared for a patient. What he found was someone who had organized her own monitoring leads into a tidier arrangement than he'd left them, had folded the blanket with geometric precision, and was watching the door with dark amber eyes that did not look like someone 3 days out of emergency blood stabilization. She was tall, he could see that even seated, the particular length of a person who takes up vertical space when standing. Her skin, properly colored now, was a deep warm bronze gold, which he knew from his limited Ethoriketh medical notes indicated functional health. Her hair was cut close to her skull in a pattern he would later learn was a warrior caste tradition, though her warrior caste rank was the thing she no longer held. She said something in her own language, then carefully in coalition standard, "You are the human medic." "Eli Vance," he said, "Corporal, how are you feeling?" She studied him for a moment as though the answer to his question was not the thing she was trying to assess. "You used your own blood," she said. "Partial match. It was enough to get your pressure back up while I finished the extraction. How's the pain level? Scale of 1 to... Why?" He stopped. "Why did I?" "You do not know me." She said it as a statement, not a question, and the precision of it suggested she had been thinking about it for some time, possibly all 3 days. "I carry no rank. I was brought in without identification confirmed. There would have been no formal consequence if you had not." She paused, selecting her words with evident care. "If you had followed standing protocol." Eli pulled the stool out and sat on it, which put him at her eye level rather than above her, which felt like the correct spatial choice for this conversation. "You were dying," he said. "I had a partial match and a window. The math worked." "The math," she repeated. "I'm a medic. I calculated the intervention and I made a call." He paused. "The call worked. How's the pain level?" She was quiet for a moment, and in that quiet he noticed something he would think about later, the way she recalibrated after each exchange. Not like someone uncomfortable, but like someone accustomed to operating in environments where every piece of information was assessed before the next move. A soldier's processing. Someone who had been very well trained for a very long time. 4, she said. "The pain is approximately 4. Tell me if it gets higher. I can adjust the..." "Corporal Vance." He stopped. She was looking at him with something that was not quite the expression he had expected, not gratitude or not only gratitude, something more careful, more measuring. "You understand," she said, "that you have incurred a Kethsal obligation." He did not know that word. "I don't have that in my..." "It is not in your protocols," she said. "I am aware." A beat. "I am also aware," she said carefully, "that you did not know, which is the only reason I am telling you rather than simply beginning to discharge it." She said this with the complete seriousness of someone describing a contractual clause. In Ethoriketh law, a blood debt, a Kethsal, accrues when a life is preserved by another's blood. The one preserved owes a debt of equivalent weight. She paused. "I do not know yet what form it will take, but you should know that you have it." Eli looked at her for a moment. "I wasn't calculating a debt," he said. "I know," she said. "That makes it larger." She said this as though it were simply true, a physical law rather than an abstraction, and he found he didn't have an immediate argument for it. "How's the pain level?" he said. Something that was not quite a smile moved at the corner of her mouth. "Still 4, she said. She stayed at Curl for 22 days. This was longer than her physical recovery strictly required. By day 10, she was cleared for light movement, and by day 14, the senior surgeon had formally indicated she could be transported if arrangements were made. The arrangements were not made, which Eli suspected was partly because she showed no inclination toward making them, and partly because the question of where she would be transported to was not immediately obvious. She had no unit. She had no rank. She had, as far as Eli could determine from the records Medic Second Orion had eventually pulled, a formal status note that read cast released pending conduct review, which Orion translated for him, in the frank way of someone who had been at Curl long enough to lose diplomatic instincts, as, "Her people threw her out." "For what reason?" Eli asked. "The record sealed." Orion paused. "There are 3 conduct charges on file that haven't been formally dismissed. They're all from the same engagement. She was the commanding officer." He thought about this. Did she do something wrong? "The record sealed," Orion said again, which was not the same as an answer. Eli continued checking on her twice daily, as he did for all patients whose status was active monitored. He told himself this distinction was neutral. He was not certain it was neutral. He was sufficiently self-aware to know that the twice-daily checks had started taking slightly longer than they strictly needed to, and that the conversation had expanded beyond pain-level assessments, and that he looked at the monitoring log in the morning with a particular attention to the alert and stable notation that he did not apply to his other patients. What they talked about was mostly practical: the layout of the station, the composition of the monitoring equipment, which she found interesting from an engineering standpoint, the 400 pages of coalition protocols, which she had obtained a copy of from somewhere and was reading with the focused expression of someone auditing an adversarial contract. "Your blood typing system is incomplete," she said on the 9th day, not looking up from the document. "For Ethoriketh, yes. The sample pool for the compatibility study was. For 6 species, I have found 4 errors in the death-Kara cross-reference that would result in a false negative partial match." She set the document down. "Who is responsible for this database?" "Coalition Medical Records Office, I think." "I can submit I will submit the corrections." She said this with the air of someone who had decided a thing rather than proposed it, and Eli found he was not surprised. She had spent 9 days in a medical bay and had reorganized her monitoring leads, read all 400 pages of protocols, and identified 4 database errors. The information about how she operated was accumulating. "You don't have a coalition access credential," he said. She looked at him in a way that suggested this was not an obstacle she planned to be detained by. "No," she said. He submitted the corrections himself, citing her as the source, which felt like the accurate thing to do. It was Orion who told him about the engagement. Not from the sealed record. Orion was not the type to access sealed records, but from the ambient knowledge that moved through forward operating stations the way air moves, finding its way through every gap. Someone had talked to someone who had been at the garrison where Rael Voss's unit had been stationed. The facts, as they reached Eli on the 15th day, were: the engagement had been a misread. Intelligence had classed the civilian settlement as a forward position. Rael Voss, commanding officer, had challenged the intelligence assessment at briefing and been overruled. The strike had been authorized by 2 officers senior to her. The settlement had been a civilian settlement. The 3 conduct charges on her record were for insubordination at briefing, continued unauthorized communication attempting to halt the strike after the order had been given, and conduct prejudicial to operational integrity, which Orion translated as, she had made enough noise to require 3 formal charges to silence. The strike had gone forward. Rael Voss had filed a formal dissent report within 6 hours of the engagement, naming both senior officers. The dissent had resulted in the conduct review. The conduct review had resulted in her cast release, which was the Ethoriketh equivalent of a dishonorable discharge, pending the outcome of a formal inquiry that had been in progress for 6 months and showed no signs of resolution. Eli sat with this information for a while. Then he went to check her afternoon monitoring logs. She was standing at the narrow observation window when he came in, not the patient posture he'd grown accustomed to, but standing the way she probably stood when she still had rank, straight, balanced, taking up the space of someone who expected to be listened to. The window framed the transit approach to Curl, a spread of dark sky and the distant light of the relay station. She had been watching it the way people watch things they are not quite looking at. "Pain level," he said. "1," she said, without turning. "At this point I suspect it is residual rather than functional." "Probably," he agreed. He came to stand beside her at the window, not beside her in the way of someone claiming space, just in the way of two people who were both, at the moment, looking at the same thing. "I heard about the engagement," he said. A pause from the sealed record. "From the station, these things move." She was quiet for a moment. He had learned in 15 days to let her quiets run. She was not a person who used silence as evasion. She used it to organize what she intended to say. "I was overruled by my superior officers," she said finally, "who were acting within their authority to overrule me. I was then formally charged for the manner in which I was overruled." A beat. "The charges are technically valid. I did conduct prejudicial to operational integrity." The integrity I was prejudicing was the integrity of a decision to strike a civilian settlement, but that distinction does not appear in the charge language. "The inquiry will find that," Eli said. She turned to look at him. Her expression was not bitter, something more carefully neutral than bitterness, which is a form of care for the outcome. This was the expression of someone who had already assessed the likely result and made their peace with it. "The inquiry," she said, "is conducted by an internal Ithari-Keth military tribunal. The officers who authorized the strike sit 2 ranks above the tribunal's senior member." Eli looked at the window. "Ah," he said. "Yes," she said, "ah." He stood there for a moment, thinking. The relay station light blinked at its regular interval. He said, "Is there anything that can be done from outside the tribunal?" She turned to look at him again. This look was different, a precise, assessing look, the kind he had seen her apply to the protocol documents and the monitoring equipment and the 4 database errors. "I do not understand the question," she said, but in the way of someone who understood it entirely and was waiting to see what he meant by asking it. "Coalition oversight body," he said. "The tribunal's internal, but the inquiry has cross-species implications, a civilian settlement, which presumably included non-Ithari-Keth residents. If there's a multi-species casualty count, there's a coalition interest. An external review petition could run parallel to the internal inquiry." She was very still. "I don't know the procedural specifics," he said. "I know the coalition has an oversight mechanism for exactly this kind of." "I know the mechanism," she said. "I did not consider it." "Why not?" Another of her organized silences. "Because petitioning for external oversight of an internal Ithari-Keth matter is," she paused. "It is considered an admission that the internal process cannot be trusted. It would be treated as a further act of insubordination by my people." "With respect," Eli said, "your people have already released your caste." She looked at him. "They've already taken the thing the threat was protecting," he said. "The only question is whether the external petition changes the inquiry outcome." Rael Voss was quiet for a long moment. She turned back to the window. The relay light blinked. When she spoke, her voice was the careful, precise register he had heard every day for 15 days, but there was something different in it, something that was not quite the soldier's containment, something that had allowed a small amount of real weight in. "You are a medic," she said. "Yes." "A corporal at a forward operating station." "Yes." "You have no stake in this matter." He thought about how to answer that. "I have the stake I decide to have," he said. "That's usually enough." She did not answer, but she stood there at the window for a long time, and he stood there with her, and when he checked the monitoring log before he left, he made a note to look up the coalition oversight petition process that evening. The petition took 11 days to prepare properly. This was, in some ways, because the process was genuinely complex. cross-referencing the coalition oversight statutes, identifying the multi-species casualty documentation that would support an external interest claim, drafting the formal request in a language precise enough to survive a technical challenge. It was, in other ways, because Rael Voss was a thorough person who did not file documents she had not examined from every angle, and the examination from every angle required time. She worked on it in the medical bay. On the small table Eli had quietly moved into the room on day 16 without making a point of it. He brought her database access through his own credentials, which was a procedural irregularity he decided to feel neutral about. She corrected 3 more errors in the coalition database in the process of accessing the Oversight Statute Archive, which he also submitted. Lieutenant Mark came to find him on day 19. "The Ithoriketh Station liaison," she said, "has asked about the status of your patient's discharge." "She's medically cleared," Eli said. "Her discharge is her own decision." Mark looked at him in the careful way she had. "There's been a query from the military tribunal about her current access to coalition systems." Eli kept his expression neutral. "She's identified 4 errors in the cross-species blood typing database and 3 in the Oversight Statute Archive. The corrections have been submitted through proper channels." "That's not why they're asking." "Probably not," Eli agreed. "Is there a formal complaint?" "Not yet." "Then I don't think I have anything to respond to." Mark looked at him for a long moment. He thought she might push it. She said, "Don't make me file complicated paperwork, Vance." "I'll do my best," he said. The petition was filed on day 22 through the coalition oversight body's formal submission channel, with a cover note citing multi-species civilian casualties and requesting parallel external review. Rael Voss read it once more before Eli submitted it. She said the 3rd paragraph. He looked. She was right, the 3rd paragraph had a redundancy that weakened the evidentiary claim. He fixed it. She read it again. Then she nodded. He filed it. She was transported off Curl the same afternoon, because once the petition was filed, the reason to delay her own departure had resolved, and because staying at a coalition-forward station, while the Ithoriketh Military Tribunal was inquiring into her database access, would create complications for Eli that neither of them wanted. She stood in the bay door before she left. She was in her own clothes again, civilian, not military, the caste release status visible in their cut, and she was carrying a single pack that looked like it contained everything she had. She was back to her full height, and he registered again, as he had each time, that she occupied space differently than a patient. "The Kethsal," she said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She said it with the mild precision of someone correcting a misapprehension. "That is not what Kethsal means. It is not obligation in the sense of coercion. It is," she paused, selecting with care. "It is a recognition that a debt exists and that the one who holds it intends to discharge it, not because they are required to, because the debt is real." He looked at her. "What form does it take?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "I will let you know when I do." She left. He went back on shift. He told himself, with reasonable success, that this was a clean and complete event, a medical intervention with a procedural follow-on, and that the slight altered quality of his afternoon rounds was simply the adjustment of returning to normal workflow. He almost believed it. The coalition oversight petition was accepted for review 41 days later. He knew because a notification arrived in his official record submission queue, acknowledging that the petition filed under his credentials had been accepted and forwarded to the review body. He was not a party to the petition. His role was listed as submitting agent, third party, non-interested. He had never claimed an interest. He had simply filed the paperwork. He did not hear from Rael Voss in those 41 days. He had not expected to. He did not check his messages with any particular frequency, or at any particular time of day, or on the basis of any expectation that someone might have sent him something. He checked his messages at normal intervals, which happened to be slightly more frequent than they had been previously, and this was a coincidence of shift scheduling. The review took 4 months. He was on rotation at a different station, Outpost Marin, quieter, less shrapnel, when the review outcome was published in the Coalition official record, which was a public document that he had reason to access for professional purposes, and which he was simply reading thoroughly, as he read all documents thoroughly. The review outcome. The engagement had been conducted in error. The intelligence assessment had been flawed. The authorization for the strike had been given without adequate verification of the civilian settlement determination. The formal dissent filed by the commanding officer prior to the engagement was entered into the record as evidence of due diligence. The conduct charges were vacated. The cast release order was formally challenged as inconsistent with the Coalition's cross-species conduct standards, and the case had been referred back to the HFY military authority with a recommendation for reinstatement. He read it twice. Then he put his monitor down and went to get a coffee, because the medical bay at Outpost Marin had a coffee unit that worked, which Curl had not, and he had the kind of clean, uncomplicated feeling he associated with problems that had resolved correctly. A mathematical satisfaction, tidy at the edges, nothing left over. He came back to his bay. He checked his messages at the normal interval. There was a message from Rael Voss. It was short. This did not surprise him. She was not a person who used more words than the information required. The outcome has been published. You will have seen it. I am reinstated, conditional on the formal tribunal review, which I am told will proceed within 90 days, and which the Coalition outcome makes a formality. I remain in an interim status for now. I wanted to tell you before I tell anyone else. I am not certain why this seemed important. I will examine it and report back. The Quetzal is not yet discharged. I want you to know that I have not forgotten it. He read it 3 times. He wrote back. I saw the outcome. It was the right result. He paused then. I'm glad you're going to get it back. Another pause. He was not naturally a person who second-guessed messages, having found in his experience that messages sent simply and directly caused less difficulty than messages carefully constructed to manage the reader's interpretation. But he sat with the cursor for a moment. He sent it. The Quetzal discharged in the end in 3 parts. The first was practical. Rael Voss had, in the course of preparing the Coalition Oversight Petition, compiled the most comprehensive cross-referenced index of HFY physiological data in the Coalition Medical Database, not as a deliberate project, but as a byproduct of accessing everything necessary for the evidentiary record. She submitted it to the Coalition Medical Database under both their names, which he learned when he received a co-authorship notification from the database office. The submission corrected 11 errors and filled 7 gaps in the HFY cross-species compatibility record, including the partial match data that had been the determining factor in his original intervention. He sent her a message. You didn't have to include my name. She replied, your methodology was the basis for the intervention. The record should reflect the methodology. He sat with this for a while. It was, he thought, the most precisely correct acknowledgement he had ever received for a medical intervention, and it had arrived 11 months after the fact, organized and exact, and without any expectation that he respond to it in a particular way. The second part arrived in official form, 3 months after the database submission. The HFY military authority, completing its tribunal review under the Coalition's referral, issued a formal reinstatement, and, on an additional notation that Eli read twice to be sure he was reading correctly, a public recognition of the Coalition Oversight Petition that had triggered the external review. The recognition cited, by name and station, the submitting agent. He was at Outpost Marin when his senior officer came to find him with the expression of someone holding information they had not expected to hold. She said, "Vance, there's an Ithori Keth official recognition citation with your name on it." "I know," he said. "I'll respond formally." She looked at him for a moment. "You filed a petition with the Coalition Oversight Body on behalf of a patient. She was medically discharged at the time." "Vance." "The petition identified a legitimate coalition interest in the inquiry outcome," he said. "The review agreed." His senior officer looked at the citation, then at him. "This is a second-rank honor from the Ithori Keth Military Authority. They don't give those to human corpsmen." "I'm told I'm the first," he said. "The record will reflect the circumstances." She shook her head, which was not a negative. It was the expression of someone adjusting to information. "Write the formal response," she said, "correctly." "I will," he said. He already had it drafted. The third part was not official. It arrived on a Tuesday, 8 months after the reinstatement, when Eli Vance was finishing a shift at Outpost Marin and came out of the medical bay to find Rael Voss standing in the corridor. She was in uniform. Her rank was back. He could see it in the insignia, and in the way she stood, which was the way she had stood at the observation window when she thought no one was assessing her posture. The cast pattern in her hair was precise and clean. She was carrying nothing, which meant she was here for a specific and time-limited purpose, which was the way she did things. He said, "I didn't know you were coming." "No," she said. "I wanted to arrive without advance notice, so that you could not spend time before my arrival deciding how to behave." He considered this. "That's quite deliberate." "Yes." She looked at him in the measuring way, the full assessment way, the way that meant she had been collecting data and had reached a conclusion. "I have been thinking about how to discharge the remaining portion of the Kethsal," she said. "The physiological record and the petition address the debt in kind. What remains is a different category." "What category?" She was quiet for a moment. The corridor was empty behind her. The station hum was very steady. "You asked what she wanted," she said, which was not what he had expected. "When I was in the bay, twice you asked what I wanted, not what I needed, not what the protocol indicated, not what would be most efficient. What I wanted." She paused. "I have thought about this. I have tried to identify how many times in 11 years of military service someone has asked me what I wanted in a situation where the answer was not already operationally determined." He waited. "3 times," she said. "Before you. 3 times in 11 years, and in all 3 cases the person asking was using the question as a negotiating position. A beat. You had no negotiating position. You had no operational need for the answer. You asked because—" She stopped, started again. "I have not been able to identify why you asked." "Because you were a person," he said. "Not a problem to be solved. A person who had been in a very bad situation and survived it, and you deserved to be asked." She looked at him for a long time. The station hum, the corridor light, steady and cool. The distant sound of the transit approached somewhere below. "I want," she said carefully, "to know what this is." He understood the question. It was the same precise language she applied to everything. Not what could this be or what might this become, but what is this, assessed in the present tense with her full attention. "I think," he said, equally carefully, "that it's the kind of thing that requires more than one conversation." "I know that," she said. "I am asking whether you want to have them." He looked at her, at the uniform and the rank and the careful, measuring way she held herself, and also at the small tell he had learned in 22 days at Curl, the slight forward lean of someone whose containment was not indifference, who was waiting for information that genuinely mattered to them. "Yes," he said, "I want to have them." She held the answer for a moment the way she held all information, assessing it, checking it, running it against what she already knew. Then she nodded, once, the decisive nod of someone who has reached a conclusion they intend to act on. "Then the Quetzal," she said, "is discharged." He thought about saying it wasn't a debt, that it had never been a debt. He thought about saying that he hadn't calculated a return when he made the intervention, hadn't expected anything, hadn't been keeping a ledger. He thought about how she had told him on the third day that not calculating it made it larger. He thought about the precision with which she had said it, and the precision with which she was standing here now. "All right," he said instead, "discharged." She held his gaze for another moment. Then, for the first time since he had known her, she smiled, not the controlled, not quite smile he had seen at the edge of her mouth in the medical bay, but a real one, full and brief, the kind of expression that has been accurately earned and does not need to perform. "Walk with me," she said. "I have 11 months to account for." He fell into step beside her. The Coalition database, in the updated version, listed the Ethoriketh compatibility correction under 2 names. Most people who consulted it would not notice. The ones who did tended to be medics at forward operating stations who found themselves facing the same problem Eli Vance had faced at Curl, who pulled up the partial match record and found that it was complete now, verified, 11 errors corrected. The notation at the bottom of the record read, "Methodology, Field Triage, Curl Station, Data Compilation, Joint. Corrections submitted 11 months post-intervention." It did not say what the intervention had been. It did not say that a corporal had sat on the floor of his own triage bay afterward, or that the woman who compiled the corrections had spent 22 days in a medical bay reading 400 pages of protocol and finding 11 errors. It did not say any of that. It just said the data was right now. Which, all things considered, was the most important part.